Once upon a time, in the bustling heart of a modern city where secrets lurked behind every closed door, lived a couple named Daniel and Victoria. Daniel was a gentle soul, a man who cherished simplicity and loyalty, while Victoria was a whirlwind of charm and ambition, always craving excitement and the thrill of the new. Their marriage of 5 years had weathered its fair share of storms, but it was one particular tempest that would change everything. Victoria, over a candle-lit dinner one autumn evening, proposed something that struck Daniel like a thunderclap. "I think we should try an open marriage," she said, her tone casual but her eyes alight with something unreadable. Daniel froze, his fork hovering mid-air. "An open marriage?" he repeated, as if the words were foreign to him. "Yes," Victoria replied, her voice silkier now, persuasive. "We've grown so predictable, don't you think? This could add some spice, some excitement to our lives. And besides," she added with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, "it's not like we're kids anymore. It's about exploration, freedom." Daniel wasn't one for rash decisions. He asked for time to think, though his heart already felt heavy with the unspoken weight of her desires. Over the next week, they debated, discussed, and even argued. Ultimately, he agreed, his love for Victoria outweighing the knots of unease, tightening in his chest. At first, the arrangement seemed harmless enough. They set boundaries, honesty above all, no emotional entanglements, and transparency about their experiences. But it wasn't long before cracks began to show. Victoria, it turned out, had someone in mind all along, her ex-boyfriend, Lucas, the one she had often described as her first great love. Daniel learned this one night when she casually mentioned her plans over dinner, as if it were no more significant than a grocery list. "Lucas?" Daniel asked, his voice faltering. "Oh, don't be like that," she said, waving her hand, dismissively. "It's just physical. You know how it works." But Daniel didn't know how it worked. Not really. Because while he had tried to open himself to the idea, he found he couldn't bring himself to act on it. His heart, steadfast and loyal, belonged to Victoria. Victoria, however, took to the arrangement with a vigor that left Daniel reeling. Her dates with Lucas became more frequent, and her stories about them more detailed. What had started as a venture into shared exploration felt to Daniel more like a chasm opening between them. Then, things took a darker turn. Daniel began noticing small, unsettling changes. Victoria's phone, once carelessly left on counters and tables, was now guarded like a treasure chest. Late-night work meetings became suspiciously common. And then there was the day he saw her car parked outside Lucas's apartment, despite her insistence that she was elsewhere. Confrontations led to denials, and denials to fights. But the real shock came one night when Daniel returned home to find his private journal, the one he used to process his feelings, open on the living room table. Pages were marked with sticky notes, passages underlined in red ink. "I had to know how you were feeling," Victoria said unapologetically when he confronted her. "You've been so distant." "You read my journal?" Daniel asked, his voice a mix of disbelief and betrayal. "I just wanted to understand," she insisted, though her expression betrayed no remorse. The final straw came when Daniel discovered a tracking app installed on his phone, a revelation that left him cold and trembling. Victoria had crossed a boundary he couldn't ignore. "It was just to keep us connected," she explained when he confronted her. "I worry about you." "No," Daniel said, his voice firm for the first time in weeks. "You don't worry about me. You worry about losing control." For the first time, Daniel saw Victoria for who she truly was, a woman consumed by her own insecurities, masking them with a facade of confidence and liberation. He realized that her demand for an open marriage hadn't been about mutual growth or shared adventure. It had been about her. With a heavy heart, Daniel ended the marriage. He moved out of their shared apartment and began rebuilding his life, piece by piece. It wasn't easy. The wounds Victoria left ran deep. But in the quiet of his new home, with no tracking apps, no guarded phones, and no intrusive questions, Daniel found something he hadn't felt in years: peace. As for Victoria, she tried reaching out, her messages alternating between apologies and accusations. But Daniel had made up his mind. He blocked her number, deleted her from his life, and chose to move forward, leaving her and her tangled web of manipulations behind. And so, Daniel's story became one of resilience and rediscovery. He learned that love without trust is no love at all, and that sometimes Daniel's newfound peace was fragile, like the first thaw of spring after a long, bitter winter. Though he had left Victoria behind, memories of her betrayal clung to him like shadows. And just as he began to settle into his new life, the universe seemed to conspire to unearth one last damning chapter of their story. It happened one rainy afternoon as Daniel was unpacking the last box from his old life. Inside was a forgotten collection of keepsakes, a mix of photos, cards, and mementos from his marriage to Victoria. Among them, a familiar notebook caught his eye. It was Victoria's, a sleek leather journal he'd once gifted her on their 3rd anniversary. She'd thanked him warmly, promising to use it for her creative writing. But as he turned its pages, he found no poems, no short stories, no dreams. Instead, he found a list. It was written in her neat, looping handwriting, and at the top of the page it read, "Reasons why he'll never find out." Beneath it were bullet points, each more chilling than the last. "Lucas knows how to cover his tracks. Daniel never checks my phone. Always delete messages immediately. Call it work if he gets suspicious. Keep him feeling guilty for questioning me." Daniel's hands shook as he turned the page, his heart hammering against his ribs. The next entry was a calendar, detailing dates and times that coincided with nights Victoria had claimed to be working late. Alongside some of the entries were small, coded notes: dinner, area L's, stay over, wine plus unwind. A flood of memories surged back, each one now reframed by the journal's contents. The nights he had stayed up late waiting for her. The faint scent of cologne he hadn't recognized on her clothes. The way she'd deflected every time he expressed his doubts. But it didn't stop there. Tucked into the back of the journal was a folded envelope. Inside were receipts, hotel stays, fancy dinners, even a boutique lingerie store he hadn't known she frequented. One receipt, dated months before their agreement to open the marriage, was for a weekend getaway. 2 people, 1 room. The weight of it was overwhelming, but it wasn't just anger or heartbreak that filled Daniel. It was clarity. He finally had the answers to questions that had gnawed at him for months, and the evidence was irrefutable. Yet the most damning discovery came in the form of a USB drive taped to the back cover of the journal. Out of morbid curiosity, Daniel plugged it into his laptop. What he found made his stomach turn. There were photos, some of Victoria and Lucas together, their arms draped around each other in intimate settings. Videos, too, where Victoria's voice could be heard laughing, flirting, speaking words of affection that Daniel had once believed were meant only for him. And then, at the very end, a voice memo recorded by Victoria herself. "I don't think he'll ever figure it out," she said, her tone light and amused. "Daniel's so trusting, so predictable. It's almost boring, really. But Lucas, he gets me. He always has. This thing with Daniel, it's comfortable, but it's not living. I'm done settling for less." Daniel stopped the recording, his vision blurred by tears. He sat there in silence, the rain tapping against the window like the echo of his broken heart. But amidst the pain, there was resolve. Victoria had taken more than just his trust. She had taken his sense of self. It was time to reclaim it. The next morning, Daniel met with his lawyer. Armed with the journal, the receipts, and the USB drive, he filed for divorce, citing infidelity. The evidence left no room for denial, and Victoria's attempts to charm or manipulate her way out of it fell flat. In the weeks that followed, Daniel found strength in unexpected places. Friends who rallied around him, colleagues who offered support, and even the quiet moments he spent alone, rebuilding his confidence piece by piece. One day, as he packed away the last remnants of his marriage, he stumbled across the journal again. For a moment, he considered burning it, letting the flames consume the weight of the past. But instead, he placed it in a box labeled Lessons Learned, because that's what the journal had become. Not just a record of betrayal, but a reminder of how far he had come. And so, Daniel closed the book on Victoria, both literally and figuratively. He moved forward, not with bitterness, but with a renewed sense of self-worth. He knew he deserved a love that was honest, a life that was free from deceit, and a future that was entirely his own. Victoria, for all her schemes, had taught him the most valuable lesson of all. Sometimes the greatest act of love is learning to let go. Daniel had the evidence in hand, but it wasn't enough for him to fully understand the depth of Victoria's betrayal. He needed the truth, the whole truth, and he was determined to piece it together, no matter how painful it would be. He began his investigation methodically, starting with her social media accounts. Victoria was always meticulous about curating her online image, but Daniel now knew how much could be hidden in plain sight. A close examination of her posts and tagged photos revealed subtle patterns, locations she had visited without mentioning, pictures with friends where Lucas appeared in the background, and vague captions that now read like coded messages. Then there were the bank statements. Daniel had access to their shared accounts, and he combed through them for anomalies. He noticed recurring charges at a coffee shop far from her usual routes, dinners at upscale restaurants he had never been invited to, and rideshare receipts that ended at addresses he didn't recognize. One particular charge stood out: a hefty payment to a boutique hotel on a weekend she had claimed to be attending a work retreat. Fueled by these discoveries, Daniel decided to confront Lucas directly. It wasn't an easy decision. Every instinct told him to avoid the man who had intruded on his marriage, but Daniel needed answers. After a few discreet inquiries, he learned where Lucas worked and visited his office under the guise of a professional meeting. When Daniel walked into Lucas's office, the man's face betrayed a flicker of recognition and guilt. Daniel wasted no time. "I know about you and Victoria," he said calmly, though his voice carried the weight of suppressed anger. Lucas tried to deny it at first, but Daniel's persistence, coupled with the evidence he already had, soon broke him down. What followed was a reluctant confession. Lucas admitted that he and Victoria had reconnected shortly after their marriage began to falter. It had started with innocent messages, then escalated to meetups under the guise of catching up, and eventually to a full-blown affair. "She told me you were distant," Lucas said, avoiding Daniel's gaze. "She said you didn't understand her anymore." "Distant?" Daniel replied, his voice edged with disbelief. "She never even gave me the chance to understand." Lucas apologized, though it rang hollow in Daniel's ears. He left the office feeling no satisfaction, only a deep, gnawing ache. Still, the picture wasn't complete. The journal, the bank statements, and Lucas's confession painted part of the story, but Daniel wanted to understand the why. Why had Victoria strayed so far, and why had she gone to such lengths to hide it? One evening, Daniel found his answer, unexpectedly. He remembered the tracking app she had installed on his phone, the one she had used to monitor his movements. Out of curiosity, he checked her old phone, which he had kept in case she needed it for anything. To his surprise, the tracking app, was still logged in, but this time it revealed her locations instead of his. He saw patterns emerge. A particular apartment complex she visited frequently, a park bench where she lingered for hours, and even the hotel from the receipt. The app's history stretched back months, revealing a timeline that overlapped perfectly with her lies. But the most haunting revelation came when he decided to visit one of these locations, a small art studio she'd frequented. He found her there one afternoon, painting alongside Lucas. They didn't notice him at first. They were too engrossed in each other, laughing and sharing what seemed to be an intimate moment. Something snapped inside Daniel. He had spent months unraveling her deceit, questioning himself, and carrying the burden of their fractured marriage. Now he saw the truth with his own eyes. "I hope it was worth it," Daniel said, his voice cutting through the studio like a whip. Victoria spun around, her face draining of color. "Daniel, what are you doing here?" "Following the trail you left," he said, his tone calm but resolute. "It's all here, Victoria. Every lie, every excuse, every betrayal. I just wanted to see it for myself." Lucas tried to interject, but Daniel silenced him with a glare. "This isn't about you," he said. "This is between me and her." Victoria stammered, trying to explain, to justify, but Daniel had heard enough. He turned and walked away, leaving her protests behind. In the days that followed, Daniel finalized his divorce proceedings. Armed with the evidence he had gathered, he ensured the process was swift and decisive. Victoria, once so confident in her ability to control the narrative, found herself exposed and powerless. For Daniel, the investigation into her betrayal was painful, but it was also liberating. It gave him closure and the clarity to move forward with his life. He had uncovered the truth, no matter how ugly it was, and in doing so, he reclaimed his dignity and his freedom. Daniel's quest for the truth became an obsession, fueled by the nagging sense that the betrayal ran deeper than he initially thought. The pieces were all there, the journal, the receipts, Lucas's shaky confession. But Daniel needed undeniable proof, not just for closure, but to ensure he wasn't left questioning himself in the years to come. One evening, as he sat alone in his quiet apartment, his thoughts drifted to the cloud storage account he and Victoria had shared during their marriage. It had been set up to store photos, important documents, and other files for their shared life. She had long since stopped using it, or so she thought. Logging into the account, Daniel scrolled through old vacation photos and wedding pictures, bittersweet memories that now felt like a different lifetime. But then, he noticed a folder, tucked away in the corner of the digital archive, titled simply Work Docs. Curious, he clicked on it. Inside were dozens of files, most of which appeared to be spreadsheets and reports. But one file caught his eye, a subfolder titled Personal. His pulse quickened as he opened it. The folder contained a series of photos and screenshots that told a story far more damning than he'd anticipated. There were pictures of Victoria and Lucas together at various locations, from cozy cafes to what appeared to be a weekend getaway at a lake. One image showed them holding hands, their faces lit with smiles Daniel hadn't seen from Victoria in years. There were also screenshots of text message conversations, messages Victoria must have backed up inadvertently. Reading them was like plunging a knife into his own heart. Victoria, I hate having to sneak around like this. Lucas, you don't have to, you know, just leave him. Victoria, it's complicated. Daniel's so dependable. He's a good guy, but he's not you. Further down the thread, the messages turned more explicit, detailing rendezvous Daniel hadn't known about, dates, locations, and even plans to ensure Daniel remained unsuspecting. One message in particular froze him in place. Victoria, he's been acting weird lately. I think he's starting to suspect something. Lucas, don't worry. He won't find out unless you slip up. Just keep playing it cool. The sheer audacity of their deceit left Daniel reeling. He realized this wasn't a momentary lapse or a single mistake. It was a calculated, ongoing betrayal. Victoria hadn't just been unfaithful. She had actively conspired to deceive him at every turn. But the most damning file was a voice recording labeled 4L. Shaking, Daniel played it. "Lucas," Victoria's voice began, her tone soft and intimate. "I don't know how much longer I can keep up this charade. Daniel's a good man, but he's not enough. He doesn't challenge me, doesn't excite me. With you, I feel alive. I know I should feel guilty, but I don't. I deserve to be happy, don't I?" The words hit Daniel like a tidal wave. He couldn't listen any longer and slammed the laptop shut, his chest heaving with a mix of fury and heartbreak. Determined to solidify his case, Daniel hired a private investigator to uncover anything he might have missed. Within days, the investigator provided surveillance photos of Victoria and Lucas entering a hotel together on multiple occasions, dining at restaurants, and even meeting at a park near their old neighborhood, a place where Daniel had once proposed the idea of starting a family. The investigator also dug into Lucas's background, uncovering that he had a reputation for pursuing married women and leaving a trail of broken relationships behind him. It seemed Daniel's story was just another chapter in Lucas's long history of manipulation. Armed with this mountain of evidence, Daniel confronted Victoria one final time. He arranged to meet her in public, a quiet cafe where emotions wouldn't boil over into chaos. When she arrived, her confident smile faltered as she saw the folder of documents and photos sitting on the table. "What's this?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "This," Daniel said, sliding the folder toward her, "is everything. Every lie, every betrayal, every secret you thought you could hide." Victoria flipped through the pages, her face growing paler with each one. When she reached the screenshots of her texts with Lucas, she tried to speak, but Daniel raised a hand to stop her. "Don't bother denying it," he said, his voice cold. "I have photos. I have messages. I have recordings. This isn't just about your affair, Victoria. This is about the person you've become, the lies, the manipulation, the complete disregard for the man who stood by you through everything." Tears welled up in her eyes, but Daniel couldn't tell if they were tears of guilt or simply the realization that her facade had crumbled. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I never meant for it to go this far." "But you let it," Daniel said, his voice firm. "You had every opportunity to come clean, to be honest." As the months passed, Daniel began to find peace, though the echoes of his past still lingered. The investigation into Victoria's betrayal had been exhaustive and emotionally draining, but it had also been clarifying. Now, standing on the other side of the storm, he was determined to rebuild not just his life, but his sense of self. The unexpected email one evening. As Daniel sat in his new apartment flipping through a book, his phone buzzed with a notification. It was an email from Victoria. He hesitated before opening it, unsure if he even wanted to hear from her again. Curiosity got the better of him, and he clicked it open. The email was long, almost rambling. Victoria apologized again this time, in more detail, acknowledging not just the affair, but the way she had emotionally manipulated him. "I know I don't deserve forgiveness," she wrote, "but I need you to know that everything I did was out of fear. Fear of feeling invisible, fear of not being enough. It doesn't excuse what I did, but it's the truth. You deserved better, Daniel, and I'm sorry I couldn't be that for you." At the end of the email, she mentioned that Lucas had broken things off with her shortly after Daniel's confrontation. "He said I was too toxic, and maybe he's right. I've started therapy. I need to figure out who I am and why I ruined something so good." Daniel stared at the screen, unsure how to respond, if he should respond at all. He didn't feel hatred for Victoria anymore. What he felt was closer to pity. But forgiveness? That was a bridge he wasn't ready to cross yet. He closed the email. without replying, and decided to leave it at that. Reconnecting with himself, the act of investigating Victoria's betrayal had forced Daniel to look inward. While her actions had been unjustifiable, he realized that parts of their marriage had grown stagnant long before the affair. He had been so focused on stability, on building their future, that he'd overlooked the cracks forming in their relationship. To heal, Daniel committed himself to self-discovery. He started going to the gym regularly, not just to regain physical health, but to build confidence. He joined a hiking group, rediscovering his love for the outdoors. He even picked up an old guitar that had been gathering dust in his closet for years and began teaching himself to play again. One of the most transformative steps was therapy. With the help of a skilled counselor, Daniel unpacked the trauma of the betrayal, but also the deeper wounds it had exposed, insecurities he hadn't even realized he carried. Slowly, he began to feel lighter, freer. A new connection. One weekend, Daniel decided to attend a community workshop on photography, a hobby he'd always been interested in but had never pursued. The class was small, intimate, and full of people eager to learn. One person in particular caught his attention. A woman named Elena. Elena was warm and approachable, with an easy laugh and a keen eye for detail. They partnered up during an exercise, and conversation flowed effortlessly between them. Unlike the guarded, tense dynamic he'd felt with Victoria in their final years, being around Elena felt natural, unforced. Over time, their casual conversations turned into longer chats after class, then coffee meetups, and eventually, a proper date. Elena was open and authentic in a way Daniel hadn't experienced in years. She wasn't perfect, no one was, but she was honest, and that was what mattered most to him now. Closure months later, Daniel received another email from Victoria. This time, it wasn't an apology or a plea for reconciliation. It was simple and direct. She had finalized her own therapy journey and wanted him to know that she was moving to a new city to start fresh. "I hope you're doing well, Daniel," the email read. "You deserve happiness. I hope you found it." This time, Daniel responded. His reply was brief but kind. He wished her well and hoped she found the peace she was searching for. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was closure. Moving on as Daniel stood on a hilltop one crisp autumn morning, his camera slung over his shoulder, Elena by his side, he reflected on the journey that had brought him to this point. The pain of betrayal had been a heavy burden, but it had also been a catalyst for growth. He had learned to trust himself again, to prioritize his own happiness, and to recognize the kind of love he truly deserved. As the sun rose over the horizon, painting the sky with hues of gold and crimson, Daniel lifted his camera and captured the moment. It was a snapshot not just of the dawn, but of his own new beginning, and for the first time in years, he felt truly free. Daniel's decision to hire a lawyer was not born out of spite, but out of necessity. After uncovering evidence of Victoria's betrayal, he realized that her actions might have legal implications, not just in their divorce proceedings, but also in untangling the financial web of their shared life. He needed clarity, closure, and justice. He contacted a renowned family lawyer, Clara Jennings, who specialized in high-conflict divorces and cases involving infidelity. Clara's reputation for thoroughness and her no-nonsense attitude reassured Daniel that he was in good hands. When they met in her office, he laid out everything: the emails, the text messages, the receipts, and even the findings from the private investigator he'd hired. Clara leaned back in her chair after reviewing the documents. "This is quite the case, Daniel," she said. "Infidelity itself isn't always a direct factor in divorce settlements, but depending on how your finances were affected, or if there was marital misconduct, it could play a significant role. We'll need to dig deeper." The financial audit, one of Clara's first steps, was to initiate a forensic financial audit. She suspected that Victoria's affair might have crossed into financial impropriety. If Victoria had used marital funds to finance her time with Lucas, whether for trips, gifts, or expensive outings, it could be grounds for financial compensation in the divorce. The audit uncovered troubling details. Over the past 2 years, Victoria had withdrawn large sums of cash from their joint account, claiming they were for household expenses or personal purchases. However, the investigator found that these funds had been used to book hotel rooms, pay for dinners at upscale restaurants, and even fund a weekend getaway at a luxury resort with Lucas. There was also evidence of Victoria transferring money to Lucas on multiple occasions, small amounts at first but eventually totaling several $1,000s. Clara raised an eyebrow when she saw the transactions. "This could be construed as dissipation of marital assets," she said. "She used funds meant for your shared life to sustain her affair. That's significant." Legal strategies, Clara outlined a plan. First, she would leverage the evidence to negotiate a favorable divorce settlement, ensuring Daniel would not be penalized financially for Victoria's actions. Second, she would argue for reimbursement of the dissipated marital funds. Lastly, Clara suggested pursuing a fault-based divorce, citing infidelity and financial misconduct. Fault-based divorces can be contentious, Clara warned, but in your case, the evidence is overwhelmingly in your favor. It's not just about punishing her, it's about making sure you're treated fairly. Daniel agreed. He wasn't interested in revenge, but he also refused to let Victoria walk away unscathed after her betrayal and deceit. Confronting the paper trail. As Clara and her team continued their investigation, they found even more incriminating evidence. Bank statements revealed that Victoria had opened a secret credit card account, which she used exclusively for expenses related to Lucas. The charges included not only dinners and trips, but also gifts, jewelry, expensive cologne, and even clothing. Clara brought this to Daniel's attention. "This strengthens our case," she said. "She deliberately hid these accounts from you, which further proves financial misconduct." Armed with this evidence, Clara drafted a comprehensive legal complaint. When Victoria received it, she was blindsided. She had assumed that the affair would remain a private matter between her and Daniel, never imagining that it would spill into the legal arena. Victoria's reaction. Victoria responded with anger and denial at first. Through her own lawyer, she claimed that the funds were personal and that Daniel had no right to scrutinize her spending. However, Clara countered with the documented evidence of hidden accounts, misused marital funds, and Daniel's meticulously documented timeline of her infidelity. Cornered, Victoria shifted tactics. She began pleading for leniency, sending messages to Daniel asking him to settle things amicably. "We don't have to destroy each other over this," she wrote. "We can end things without dragging it out." But Daniel wasn't moved. He replied simply, "You already destroyed us. I'm just making sure I can move forward without being left with the pieces you broke." The case escalated to a deposition where both Daniel and Victoria were questioned under oath. Clara was relentless but professional, presenting the evidence methodically. She questioned Victoria about the secret accounts, the withdrawals from their joint funds, and her communications with Lucas. Victoria struggled to maintain composure as Clara laid out the timeline of her affair. When asked directly if she had used marital funds to sustain her relationship with Lucas, Victoria hesitated before finally admitting, "Life after the storm." With the legal battle behind him, Daniel felt a sense of liberation he hadn't experienced in years. The weight of betrayal, the suffocating doubts, and the pain of uncovering the truth had finally been lifted. But as the dust settled, he was faced with a new question. What now? What did life look like beyond the wreckage of his marriage? Finding solace in solitude, Daniel moved into a modest but cozy apartment on the edge of town. It wasn't the sprawling house he had shared with Victoria, but it felt like his, a place of peace and reflection. The walls were bare at first, but over time they became adorned with framed photographs from his newfound love for photography. Each photo told a story of resilience: sunsets over serene lakes, bustling city streets, and even self-portraits that captured his evolving sense of self. He began journaling as part of his therapy, pouring his thoughts onto paper in an effort to process the trauma he had endured. The act of writing became a ritual, a way to understand his emotions and map out his path forward. Through his words, he began to see himself not as a victim, but as a survivor. Rebuilding trust. One of the hardest parts of moving on was rebuilding. His ability to trust, not just others, but himself. The betrayal had left him second-guessing his instincts, questioning how he could have missed the signs. His therapist, Dr. Patel, encouraged him to take small steps, starting with trusting himself to make decisions without overanalyzing them. Trust isn't about being sure, Dr. Patel said during one session. It's about being willing to take a leap of faith, knowing that you're strong enough to handle whatever comes next. Daniel practiced this in small ways. He tried new restaurants without reading reviews, joined social groups even when his nerves told him to stay home, and began saying yes to opportunities he would have previously avoided. Slowly, he found that his intuition hadn't been broken. It had just been clouded by pain. The unexpected connection. One day, while exploring a local farmer's market, Daniel stumbled upon a booth selling handmade ceramics. A woman with curly hair and a warm smile was showcasing her work. Her name was Leah, and her energy was magnetic. They struck up a conversation about the craftsmanship of her pottery, and before Daniel realized it, they were chatting like old friends. Leah was a sculptor and part-time art teacher who radiated a passion for creativity. She invited Daniel to one of her art classes, joking, "It's therapeutic, like smashing clay but in a controlled environment." Daniel decided to attend, and to his surprise, he found the process deeply cathartic. Working with his hands allowed him to channel emotions he hadn't realized were still lingering. Leah became a regular presence in his life, first as a friend and later as something more. What set Leah apart was her honesty. She had her own scars, a divorce, a failed business, but she wore them openly, like badges of lessons learned. Being with her was different. It was honest, raw, and real. There were no pretenses, no games, just two people navigating life with their imperfections in plain view. A chance encounter with Victoria. Months later, Daniel was walking through the park when he saw someone familiar sitting on a bench. Victoria. She looked different. Her once perfectly polished appearance had softened. She seemed surprised to see him but managed a small smile. They exchanged pleasantries, and for the first time the conversation felt neutral. There was no anger, no accusations, just two people acknowledging the paths they had taken. Victoria mentioned she was moving, out of state for a fresh start. "I've learned a lot about myself," she admitted. "I hope you're doing well, Daniel. You look happy." "I am," Daniel replied honestly. "I hope you find what you're looking for." As he walked away, he felt no lingering resentment, only a quiet gratitude that their story was finally, completely over. Moving forward, not backward, Daniel continued to build a life that felt authentic. He and Leah grew closer, bonding over shared experiences and a mutual understanding of life's messiness. They traveled together, explored new hobbies, and encouraged each other to embrace the unknown. One evening, as they sat on the balcony of Daniel's apartment, watching the city lights flicker, Leah turned to him and said, "You've been through a lot, haven't you?" Daniel nodded. "Yeah, but I think it brought me here, and here feels good." Leah smiled. "Here feels good to me too." The final chapter. Years later, Daniel looked back on the chapter of his life that had nearly broken him. The betrayal, the investigation, the legal battle. It had all been painful, but it had also been transformative. He had learned to stand up for himself, to trust his instincts, and to let go of what no longer served him. A new chapter of growth as the years passed, Daniel's life became a testament to resilience and personal growth. The lessons he had learned through his ordeal became the foundation for his new life, one filled with purpose, connection, and fulfillment. Yet his journey didn't stop at simply moving on. He was determined to create meaning out of the pain he had endured. Advocacy and helping others one day, Daniel stumbled upon an online forum where individuals shared stories of infidelity, betrayal, and the struggles of rebuilding their lives. He began to write about his own experiences, offering advice to those grappling with the aftermath of betrayal. His posts resonated with others, and before long he was invited to contribute to blogs and podcasts that focused on emotional healing and relationships. Realizing the power of his story, Daniel decided to do more. He collaborated with a therapist to create workshops for people navigating divorce and betrayal. The sessions combined practical advice, like legal and financial planning, with emotional support, teaching attendees how to rebuild their confidence and rediscover their sense of self. "I didn't choose what happened to me," Daniel told one group, "but I chose how I responded to it, and that made all the difference." The workshops became a success, drawing attendees from all walks of life. For Daniel, helping others was not only rewarding, but deeply healing. It gave him a sense of purpose and reminded him of the strength he had found within himself. The proposal Aaliyah had become an integral part of Daniel's journey, her unwavering support and vibrant energy helping him to embrace love again. Their relationship was built on trust, mutual respect, and a shared understanding of life's imperfections. On a quiet evening, while they were hiking along a trail that overlooked a sprawling valley, Daniel decided it was time to take the next step. As they reached a scenic viewpoint, he turned to Leah, his heart racing. "I never thought I'd find this again," he began, pulling a small box from his pocket. "But you've shown me that love can be honest, kind, and healing. Leah, will you marry me?" Leah's eyes filled with tears as she nodded. "Yes, Daniel. 1,000 times yes." The proposal marked a new chapter in their lives, one filled with hope and the promise of a future they would build together. Reconnecting with family and friends. Through his journey, Daniel had learned the importance of nurturing the relationships that truly mattered. He reconnected with old friends he had distanced himself from during his marriage and spent more time with his family. They had been his anchors during the storm, and he wanted to show them his gratitude. He hosted dinners, planned family outings, and became the friend and brother he had always aspired to be. The people in his life noticed the change in him, a man who was not only stronger, but also more open, compassionate, and present. A book and a legacy. Encouraged by Leah and his workshop attendees, Daniel decided to write a book about his journey. Titled From Betrayal to Breakthrough, Rebuilding Life After Infidelity, the book combined his personal story with actionable advice for readers going through similar experiences. It became a bestseller, praised for its raw honesty and practical wisdom. Daniel's work extended beyond the book. He established a foundation that provided resources for individuals dealing with the financial and emotional fallout of infidelity and divorce. The foundation offered scholarships for therapy, legal assistance, and workshops, ensuring that no one had to face such challenges alone. A moment of reflection. One crisp autumn morning, years after his life had been turned upside down, Daniel found himself back at the park where he had once run into Victoria. This time, he wasn't carrying the weight of the past. He was here to take photographs for an upcoming gallery exhibit, one showcasing images of resilience and renewal. As he framed a shot of golden leaves against a bright blue sky, he couldn't help but smile. The man he had become was unrecognizable from the one who had first discovered Victoria's betrayal. He had faced his pain, confronted his fears, and emerged stronger. Leah's voice broke his thoughts. "Hey, are you ready to go? We've got that lunch with your publisher." Daniel turned to her, his camera slung over his shoulder, and smiled. "Yeah, let's go." As they walked away, hand in hand, Daniel felt a profound sense of peace. The past was a chapter he had closed, but it had also been the foundation for the life he now cherished. His story wasn't just about betrayal, it was about transformation, resilience, and the enduring power of hope. A new purpose takes shape. As Daniel's life continued to flourish, he found himself reflecting on the deeper meaning behind his journey. He realized his experiences were more than just painful memories. They were lessons that could inspire others to embrace change, rediscover their strength, and create meaningful lives despite their hardships. The global impact of his foundation. Daniel's foundation, Reclaim and Rise, began expanding its reach. What started as local workshops and support groups grew into a global network of resources for individuals dealing with betrayal, divorce, and rebuilding their lives. The foundation launched an app that provided 24/7 access to therapists, financial planners, and legal advisors, along with a thriving online community where members could share their stories and support one another. One of the most impactful programs the foundation created was Second Act Scholarships, which offered financial aid to individuals who wanted to go back to school, start a business, or pursue dreams they had put on hold due to their circumstances. The stories of those who benefited from these scholarships, single parents who became entrepreneurs, survivors of toxic relationships who found new careers, fueled Daniel's passion for the work even more. Leah and Daniel, partners in purpose. Leah became an active partner in Daniel's mission. Her creativity and artistic vision breathed life into the foundation's outreach campaigns. She hosted art therapy sessions for those in the foundation's programs, teaching participants how to channel their emotions into creative outlets. One day, during a meeting about expanding the foundation's reach, Leah shared an idea. "What if we hosted retreats?" she suggested. "A place where people could step away from their daily lives, reconnect with themselves, and focus on healing." Daniel loved the idea. Within months, Reclaim and Rise retreats were launched. Held in serene locations around the world, the retreats combined therapy sessions, creative workshops, and wellness activities. They became a cornerstone of the foundation, helping thousands of individuals find clarity and healing in ways they never thought possible. A chance encounter with Lucas. While attending a conference in another city to speak about his foundation, Daniel encountered someone he never expected to see again. Lucas. The man who had played a pivotal role in his heartbreak looked almost unrecognizable, older, wearier, and visibly uncomfortable as their eyes met across the crowded room. Lucas approached Daniel hesitantly, his demeanor a mix of guilt and nervousness. "Daniel," he began, his voice low, "I didn't think I'd ever see you again." Daniel regarded him calmly, feeling none of the anger or bitterness he once harbored. "Life has a way of bringing people full circle, doesn't it?" he replied. Lucas offered a halting apology, admitting that he had acted selfishly and caused harm. He shared that his relationship with Victoria had been short-lived and tumultuous, and that he had spent years regretting his choices. Daniel listened, but didn't offer absolution. "I've moved on," he said simply. "I hope you've learned something from all of this." Lucas nodded, his shoulders slumping with relief. "I have. I truly have." As Daniel walked away, he felt a quiet sense of closure. Lucas was just another part of the story he had outgrown. Celebrating love and life. On their second wedding anniversary, Daniel and Leah hosted a charity gala to benefit the foundation. The event was a dazzling celebration of resilience and second chances, attended by friends, family, and supporters of Reclaim and Rise. During his speech, Daniel shared his gratitude. This foundation was born from pain, but it has grown into something beautiful because of the love and support of so many people. Tonight, we're not just celebrating what we've built. We're celebrating the strength of the human spirit and the power of hope. Leah beamed at him from across the room, her hand resting on her belly, a subtle announcement that their family was about to grow. When Daniel caught her eye, his heart swelled with joy. Life had taken him through fire, but it had also brought him to this moment, where happiness felt earned and deeply deserved. A legacy of transformation. Years later, Daniel sat in his home office, surrounded by letters, photographs, and mementos from the countless lives his foundation had touched. His journey from betrayal to triumph had become a beacon for others, proving that even the deepest wounds could heal. As he closed the scrapbook he had been browsing, he glanced at a drawing his young daughter had made, a colorful depiction of their family standing beneath a rainbow. In the drawing, Daniel was smiling, holding hands with Leah and their 2 children, while a vibrant sun shone above them. Leah appeared in the doorway, leaning against the frame with a warm smile. Lost in thought again? A new beginning. As Daniel looked back on the years since his painful divorce, he marveled at how far he had come. The man who had once been lost in the wake of betrayal, left to pick up the shattered pieces of his life, had transformed into someone unrecognizable, not just to others but to himself. The journey had been long, sometimes lonely, but also filled with extraordinary moments of growth, love, and unexpected joy. But there was still one more chapter to write, the call to expansion. One morning, as Daniel and Leah sat in their cozy kitchen, sipping coffee together, Daniel received an unexpected call. It was from a prestigious international organization dedicated to providing resources for survivors of trauma and relationship abuse. They had been following the success of Reclaim and Rise for years and were impressed by its impact. The organization had an idea. What if they joined forces? They wanted to partner with Daniel's foundation to expand its programs globally. Daniel listened intently, his mind racing with possibilities. This was the opportunity he had been waiting for. With Leah's support and their growing team, they could bring healing to even more people, far beyond the borders of their current reach. Leah could see the excitement in his eyes. "This could be huge, Daniel," she said, her voice full of encouragement. "You've always had such a powerful message, and now more people than ever will hear it." That evening, they discussed the proposal in detail, weighing the pros and cons. It would require a significant investment of time and resources, but Daniel felt an overwhelming sense of purpose, a calling that he could not ignore. The Global Initiative. Months later, Reclaim and Rise launched its first global initiative, with programs now available in over 20 countries. The foundation was able to partner with therapists, legal experts, and financial counselors from diverse backgrounds, ensuring that the resources were culturally sensitive and tailored to the unique needs of each community. The initiative's reach spread like wildfire. From intimate support groups in small towns to large-scale workshops in bustling cities, Daniel's mission was being embraced by people everywhere. Stories poured in from survivors who had found healing through the Foundation's programs. Women and men who had once felt isolated, abandoned, or unworthy now had a place where they could rediscover their strength. The impact was profound. Daniel received letters from all over the world, many from people who had never imagined they could move on from their pasts. One letter, from a woman in a rural village in India, stood out to him. She had participated in a virtual workshop and was now helping other women in her community find freedom from abusive relationships. Her words filled him with pride. "You gave me the courage to leave. Now, I'm teaching others how to stand tall." Family and legacy. In the years that followed, Daniel and Leah continued to grow in their love for each other and their family. Their children, who were now teenagers, had witnessed their parents' journey of healing and transformation. Daniel, took every opportunity to share his story with them, not to burden them, but to inspire them to live lives of authenticity and integrity. One afternoon, as the family gathered in the backyard, Leah turned to Daniel, her hand on her pregnant belly. "You've come so far, Daniel," she said softly. "We've all come so far. I'm so proud of everything you've built, not just for us, but for so many others." Daniel smiled, his heart full. "We've built it together, Leah. Every step of the way." They embraced, watching as their children played in the distance, unaware of the weight of history and the enormity of what their parents had achieved. To them, this was simply their family, their home, a place of love and safety. The final legacy, a new generation. As the years passed, Daniel and Leah's efforts to transform lives continued to grow. Their children, inspired by their parents' work, began to take an active role in the foundation. Their eldest, who had always been quiet and introspective, became passionate about supporting others through therapy. The youngest, with a love for creative expression, focused on bringing art and healing together, launching programs for young people dealing with emotional turmoil. On the day Daniel received the final award for his work, a Lifetime Achievement Award for his contribution to social change, he stood before the audience, not as the man he had been, but as the man he had become. His voice was steady, his message clear. "This work has never been about me," he began, looking out into the crowd. "It's about all of us, the survivors, the fighters, the dreamers, the ones who have been broken but not defeated, the ones who still believe that tomorrow holds something better. Our stories are powerful." The ripple effect. As Daniel continued to navigate life, his foundation's work began to have a ripple effect in ways he hadn't anticipated. The workshops, retreats, and resources were only the beginning. Soon, universities reached out, asking if Reclaim and Rise could partner with them to offer programs on emotional intelligence, relationship dynamics, and healing after trauma. High schools began using some of Daniel's materials in their counseling programs, teaching young people how to build healthy relationships and deal with their emotions in constructive ways. Daniel's story, his journey of overcoming betrayal, was no longer just his. It had become a global movement, one that was reshaping how people viewed vulnerability, trust, and recovery. A moment of reflection, one quiet evening after a particularly long day of meetings and interviews, Daniel sat alone in his office. The walls, once bare, were now adorned with photographs of the many people whose lives had been touched by the foundation. He couldn't help but reflect on the person he had been when he first started this journey. He had been broken, consumed by anger and loss, unsure if he'd ever find peace again. But now, as he gazed at the faces of survivors, of people who had rebuilt their lives just like him, he understood that his greatest triumph wasn't the foundation or the success. It was the resilience to keep going when every part of him wanted to give up. His phone buzzed with a text message from Leah. "I'm so proud of you. You're making the world a better place, one story at a time." He smiled and replied, "Couldn't have done it without you." Family, growth, and the future. As the years passed, Daniel's role as a father evolved. His children, once young and unaware of the complexities of the adult world, were now entering adulthood themselves. His eldest daughter, inspired by her father's work, had decided to pursue a career in social work. She had seen firsthand the impact Reclaim and Rise had on individuals and wanted to be part of that transformation, helping others navigate the most difficult parts of their lives. His son, with his natural knack for technology, became involved in the digital side of the foundation, developing apps and online platforms to connect people across the world. His daughter often joined her father at retreats, facilitating creative workshops, while his son worked behind the scenes, ensuring everything ran smoothly. In their children's eyes, Daniel was not just a father, but a hero. Not because of his accolades, but because of his ability to love, to grow, and to change. Together, the family continued to create a world where healing and hope were always possible. A final testament to his legacy. Years later, after much thought, Daniel decided to step down from the daily operations of Reclaim and Rise. It was time for the next generation to take the reins, and he was proud to pass the torch to his children and the passionate team he had built over the years. It wasn't an end, but a new chapter, a chapter where he could focus more on the personal connections that had always mattered most to him. On his final day at the foundation, he sat in a room filled with colleagues, friends, and supporters who had become his second family. He felt a deep sense of gratitude and peace. "I didn't get here by myself," Daniel said, his voice full of emotion. "None of this would be possible without the incredible people who walked this path with me. You are the heart of this foundation, and you are the reason so many lives have been transformed. My journey of healing doesn't end here, but what we've built together will continue to ripple through the world long after I'm gone." The room erupted in applause, and Daniel felt a sense of completion. His mission had been accomplished, and the foundation he had created was in good hands. He wasn't just leaving a legacy. He was ensuring that it would live on, continuously evolving and adapting to the changing needs of the world. A peaceful future. As Daniel and Leah grew older, they found more time to travel, to explore, and to enjoy the simple moments they had worked so hard to create. They visited the places they had once dreamed of, taking in sunsets over oceans and walks through ancient cities. There were no more ghosts of the past to haunt him, only memories of a life lived fully, with purpose and love. And one evening, on a quiet beach in the Mediterranean, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Daniel turned to Leah. He could see the peacefulness in her eyes, the same peace he had found within himself over the years. "We've done it all, haven't we?" he said softly. Leah nodded, her hand resting gently in his. "We've built a life worth living." Daniel looked at the horizon, his heart full of gratitude. "We turned our pain into purpose, and in the end, that's all any of us can do." And as the stars began to shine in the vast sky above them, Daniel knew with absolute certainty that he had found his peace. His journey had come full circle. His life, once broken and scattered, had been rebuilt, brick by brick, day by day, into something far more beautiful than he could have ever imagined. This was his legacy. The end. A shadow from the past. As the years went by, Daniel's journey of healing seemed complete. He had built a life full of love, purpose, and fulfillment with Leah, his children, and his community. Reclaim and Rise was thriving, helping countless individuals rebuild their lives. Yet, even in his peace, there was a lingering shadow, a part of him that never truly let go of the pain Victoria and Lucas had caused. At times, in quiet moments when the weight of everything he had built seemed too heavy, Daniel felt the desire for justice rise within him. Not the kind of justice that could be achieved through legal battles or public exposure, but something more primal, a deep, unshakable need for revenge that simmered beneath the surface. The temptation of revenge. It all began with an unexpected phone call. One afternoon, Daniel was at his desk reviewing new initiatives for Reclaim and Rise when his phone buzzed with a familiar name, Victoria. His heart raced. He had long since cut ties with her, but the sound of her name stirred something he thought had been buried. Reluctantly, he answered. "Daniel." Victoria's voice was soft, almost apologetic. "I know we haven't spoken in a long time, but there's something I need to tell you. It's important." A mixture of curiosity and caution filled Daniel's chest. "What's this about, Victoria?" "I've made mistakes. And I hurt you," she began, her voice cracking. But I need to make things right. I've been trying to get in touch for months. There's something you don't know. Something that might change how you feel about everything." A chill ran down Daniel's spine. He had heard these types of apologies before, and he wasn't sure whether this was genuine or another manipulative tactic. He had long since forgiven the past in his heart, but the call stirred something darker in him. He had moved on, but had Victoria truly learned from her betrayal? "Why now?" he asked, his tone guarded. "I need to explain. I need to make sure you understand the truth," she said, her voice trembling. The decision. Daniel spent the next few days consumed by thoughts of what Victoria might have to say, the thought of her trying to rewrite the past, of her seeking to absolve herself of the guilt he'd felt for so long, gnawed at him. But what truly stirred his emotions was the nagging feeling that perhaps there was something more behind her sudden reappearance. Had she come back to apologize, or was there something else she was after? He realized he didn't need to know the answer. He simply needed closure. He needed to decide whether to confront the past or to let it go completely. After much contemplation, he reached out to an old friend, a private investigator who had helped him years ago when he was looking into Victoria's betrayal. He didn't plan to seek revenge in the way he had before. This time, he wanted to know the full extent of Victoria's life, her regrets, and whether she had really changed, or if she was still living a life of manipulation and deceit. The investigation. Daniel's private investigator dug into Victoria's life, uncovering details that Daniel had long since forgotten or chosen not to know. She had tried to make amends with others she had wronged, including some of the people who had been close to her during her marriage to Daniel. But the investigator also found darker truths about the people Victoria had hurt along the way, about the pattern of manipulation and dishonesty that had followed her through her life, and how she had repeatedly lied to her partners and family members in order to get what she wanted. It was enough to stir the embers of old anger within Daniel. She hadn't changed at all. She had simply adapted, learned how to hide her true self, and continued to betray the people around her. The realization filled him with an overwhelming sense of injustice. She had destroyed him, and even now it seemed like she was trying to manipulate him once again. The confrontation. In the end, Daniel knew what he had to do. It wasn't about vengeance in the traditional sense. It was about taking control, confronting the past on his own terms, and finding a way to release the lingering hold that Victoria had over him. He arranged a meeting, telling Victoria he was ready to hear what she had to say. When they sat face to face, the tension was palpable. Daniel could see the guilt in her eyes, but it didn't move him as it once would have. Instead, he felt a deep sense of clarity. "You wanted to apologize," Daniel began, his voice calm but firm. "But you've never truly faced the consequences of your actions, have you? You've spent years trying to rewrite the narrative, convincing yourself and others that you're a victim. But the truth is, you hurt me. You hurt us all. And for what? For your own selfish desires?" Victoria's face flushed with embarrassment and guilt. She tried to speak, but Daniel held up his hand to stop her. "I don't need your apology, Victoria. The truth is, you never really changed. You've spent your life playing games with people's emotions. And I'm not here to be your next victim. You've already taken enough from me." Her eyes welled with tears, but Daniel didn't feel the urge to comfort her. Instead, he stood up, walking toward the door. "You don't get to rewrite this story," he said, his voice steady. "You can't undo what you've done. But I've already moved on, and I'm finally free." A different kind of revenge. As Daniel walked away, he realized that this confrontation was the real revenge. It wasn't about causing pain or seeking retribution. It wasn't about making her feel as powerless as he had. Instead, it was about reclaiming his power, his peace, and his life. Victoria had wanted him to be trapped in the past, but he had, broken free, creating something far more powerful than revenge: freedom. The last word days later, Victoria's attempts to contact Daniel became more desperate. She sent text messages, emails, and even called his office, but Daniel didn't respond. He knew that any reaction he gave would only pull him back into her world of manipulation. He had already won. He had let go of the past, severed the chains that had bound him to her, and embraced the life he had worked so hard to create. In the end, the only true revenge was his success, his happiness, and his ability to continue thriving while she remained stuck in her own tangled web of lies and regret. Daniel looked at the horizon once more, feeling the weight of his own strength. He had conquered not just the betrayal, but the need for vengeance itself. And with that, he truly understood. Sometimes, the greatest revenge is living a life that is bigger than the betrayal ever was. The return of betrayal. Daniel's life had settled into a rhythm that was full of peace, love, and fulfillment. Reclaim and Rise had flourished beyond his expectations. His children had found their paths, and he had the support of his wife, Leah, who had stood by him through every twist and turn of his journey. Their relationship, forged through the fires of both past trauma and triumph, seemed unbreakable. But life, as Daniel knew too well, had a way of throwing unexpected curveballs. The warning signs. It started slowly, small things easily overlooked. Leah was distant, absorbed in her work, and her laughter no longer filled the room like it once did. Her phone, once something Daniel never thought twice about, became an object of secretive attention. She would often take it with her to the other room when a call came in or send texts with the screen facing down. At first, Daniel dismissed it. She was busy, stressed. He understood that. But as the days wore on, the distance between them seemed to grow, like an invisible wall. It was a late evening when Daniel first saw something that made his stomach twist. He had returned home early from a meeting, and as he entered the house, he noticed Leah sitting at the kitchen counter, her face illuminated by the glow of her phone. She was texting, her eyes flicking back and forth quickly, her body tense. But when she saw Daniel, she quickly tucked the phone away, her smile a little too wide, her laugh a little too rehearsed. Something shifted in Daniel's chest. The discovery. Daniel decided to let it go at first. He told himself he was being paranoid, that everything was fine. But the feeling wouldn't subside. It haunted him, gnawing at his thoughts late into the night. He remembered the gut-wrenching feeling he had once had with Victoria, the same sense of unease that had warned him before the betrayal had unfolded. It didn't take long for Daniel to start noticing the signs. Late nights at work, text messages that made Leah's face flush when he walked into the room. A new pattern of behavior, an increased distance, both emotional and physical. The feeling of being left out, like he wasn't part of her world anymore. He wasn't the type of man to jump to conclusions, not after everything he'd been through, but something was different this time, something he couldn't ignore. One evening, while Leah was in the shower, Daniel took a deep breath and unlocked her phone. He hadn't done this in years. After the past, he had promised to trust her completely. But now, his heart thudded in his chest, knowing that he had crossed a line. What he found was both gut-wrenching and confirming. There, in a thread of text messages, was a conversation between Leah and another man, someone Daniel had never heard of. The messages were flirtatious, intimate, and dangerously personal. There were mentions of late-night meetups, hidden exchanges, and promises of keeping things quiet. His stomach dropped, and his pulse quickened. Leah had been cheating on him. The confrontation, the realization hit Daniel like a freight train, but he knew he couldn't allow himself to react in anger, not this time. His heart ached, but he had learned over the years that raw emotion and rage often led to destruction. Instead, He decided to confront her, calmly and directly. That evening, after dinner, when the house was quiet, he sat across from Leah at the dining table. She noticed the serious look in his eyes and shifted uncomfortably in her seat. "Leah," Daniel began, his voice steady but filled with an undercurrent of hurt. "I know." Leah's eyes widened, panic flooding her face. She opened her mouth to speak, but Daniel held up his hand to stop her. "I know about the texts, the late nights, everything." His words were calm, but the weight of them crashed down on both of them. Leah's face turned pale, her eyes searching his for any sign of disbelief. But Daniel didn't flinch. He didn't raise his voice. He simply stared at her, waiting for her to speak. For a moment, Leah didn't say anything. Then tears welled up in her eyes and she broke down. "I'm sorry, Daniel. I never wanted to hurt you. It just happened. I didn't know how to stop myself." Daniel's chest tightened at the sight of her crying, but he held his ground. "Who is he?" he asked, his voice low but piercing. She hesitated, looking down at the table. "His name is Evan. He's from my yoga class. We just connected, and one thing led to another. I never meant for it to go this far." Daniel's heart shattered as he heard the words. This wasn't the first time he had been betrayed. But this time, the betrayal came from the woman he had trusted the most. His partner, his confidant, the person who had been his greatest source of strength. He felt a cold numbness wash over him. It wasn't the searing rage he had once known. It wasn't even the heartbreak he had expected. The quiet, after the storm. The first few weeks after the breakup were a blur. Daniel had once been so familiar with the quiet, empty house, yet now it felt foreign. He slept in the bed alone, ate meals in solitude, and faced the silence of the house that had once been filled with love and shared laughter. His heart felt heavy with the loss of what he had built with Leah, but he also felt a strange sense of relief, like the weight of years of unanswered questions and unspoken pain had been lifted, even if only slightly. He threw himself into his work at Reclaim and Rise, focusing on the programs and workshops that had helped so many people. But even as he poured his energy into helping others, there were moments when the hollow ache in his chest would catch him off guard. No matter how many hours he spent on the foundation, he couldn't escape the reality of his own heartache. It wasn't just the betrayal of Leah. It was the devastation of realizing that the person he had trusted most in the world had chosen to turn away from their shared life. The woman who had promised him everything had broken those promises, not once but twice. And so, the days turned into weeks. Daniel gave himself space. He didn't rush into anything. There was no new relationship, no distractions, no attempt to move on quickly. He knew that healing, true healing, could only come when he allowed himself to feel every part of the pain, the grief, the anger, the confusion, and let it wash over him without numbing it with something or someone else. Rediscovery and reflection. One evening, as autumn's crisp air settled in, Daniel took a walk through the park near his home. The colors of the leaves, vibrant reds and oranges, reminded him of the fleeting beauty of life. He had once thought that he couldn't survive the pain of betrayal. He had once believed that it would break him, that it would define him. But now, years later, he found himself on the other side, wounded, yes, but whole. He sat on a bench by the lake, staring out at the rippling water. He could hear the sounds of children playing nearby, couples walking hand in hand, and the laughter of friends sharing moments of joy. It was strange how life kept moving forward, how the world kept spinning, no matter how much pain an individual felt. Daniel pulled out his phone and began to write in his journal, something he had done for years. His thoughts, his reflections, his heart laid bare on the page. And tonight, he wrote something he had never expected to put into words. "I'm learning to love myself again, It wasn't a grand revelation, it wasn't the final step toward healing, but it was a beginning. It was a shift in perspective. For so long, he had defined his worth by his relationships, by the love he gave and received. But now, for the first time in a long time, he was starting to see that his worth wasn't contingent on anyone else. He was whole, even in his brokenness. A new path forward. In the months that followed, Daniel began to feel a sense of peace he hadn't expected. The emotional turmoil was still there, but it no longer controlled him. Instead of lingering in the pain of betrayal, he began to embrace a new understanding of himself. He surrounded himself with friends who lifted him up, and he took time to rediscover old passions, painting, hiking, traveling, things that had once brought him joy before he had gotten caught up in the cycle of seeking validation from others. His work with Reclaim and Rise grew even more fulfilling. He began to travel more extensively for the foundation, meeting people from all walks of life and hearing their stories of healing and growth. Daniel spoke at conferences, wrote articles, and began to advocate for deeper conversations about emotional healing, about how individuals could reclaim their lives after pain and betrayal. The Foundation's focus expanded as well. They started offering specialized support for individuals who had been betrayed in relationships, helping them rebuild trust in themselves and others. Daniel's own story, though personal, became an example of strength and resilience for so many. The unexpected meeting. One day, as he was attending a workshop for new counselors, Daniel found himself seated next to a woman named Clara. She had a warm presence, with a quiet yet confident demeanor. They exchanged pleasantries at first, talking about their work and the emotional healing processes they both advocated for. Clara had her own experience with heartbreak. She had been divorced twice and was now focused on helping others heal after betrayal. As the day went on, Daniel found himself drawn to Clara's wisdom and genuine empathy. She wasn't someone trying to fill a void, but someone who had taken the time to understand her own healing journey. She spoke with a depth of understanding that made him feel both seen and heard in ways he hadn't experienced in a long time. After the workshop, they sat down for coffee, and the conversation naturally flowed. They talked about their careers, their passions, and their shared belief in the power of transformation. For the first time in a long while, Daniel felt a spark of something he hadn't expected: curiosity, connection, and even a sense of peace. Clara didn't ask about his past relationships. She didn't try to fix him. She simply listened, as he did the same for her. It was refreshing. For the first time since Leah, Daniel didn't feel like he had to explain himself or justify his decisions. There was no pressure, no expectations, just two people connecting over shared experiences. The future, in the weeks that followed, Daniel and Clara continued to meet. At first, their conversations were centered around their work, how they could help others heal. But slowly, they began to share more of themselves. Daniel found himself opening up again, not just about the pain of betrayal, but about his hopes for the future, his dreams, and the possibility of finding love again, but this time, on his own terms. He wasn't looking for a savior. He wasn't seeking someone to heal him. He had already done the hard work of healing himself. But Clara, with her grounded approach to life and love, felt like a breath of fresh air. She understood that love was about partnership, not completion. And slowly, as they spent more time together, Daniel realized that he didn't need to fear the future. The future wasn't a place of pain and betrayal. It was a place of possibility, of growth, of connection, and of starting again. And so, as the seasons changed and his life continued to evolve, Daniel found a quiet hope rising within him. The past, with all its pain and heartbreak, had shaped him, but it no longer defined him. He had learned that healing wasn't linear. It was a process of becoming, of growing, and of reclaiming the parts of himself he had lost along the way. He was no longer defined by betrayal. He was defined by the strength to rise again, and this time, the path ahead felt brighter than ever before. The end.